Welcome back to the IU427 garage, everybody. We are working on our Texas Mk4 project, and we're getting it ready for paint. But not only are we getting it ready for paint, we're also getting it ready for our first go-kart ride by the owner. So we're doing things a little bit different this time. Usually I have a chance to, get the car a little farther along before the owner go-karts, because generally we go-kart it right before we're ready to pick the car up from paint. So putting it on the trailer and taking it off the trailer is no big deal. You're only, taking the car maybe 25, to 50 feet. Taking it around the block is a whole different thing. So we need to make sure that the steering is all in order. We need to make sure the brakes work. We're working on some other things, but come right back and I'll tell you everything we're working on. All right, so one of the things that I'm working on is something I just finished up here, and that is leveling the engine. Now, don't get confused with leveling the engine as the actual engine being level in the engine bay. Leveling the engine on one of these cars is more a matter of getting the side pipes the same distance off the ground. So if you look here, I've got my tape measure out, and I measured when I first started. I just bolted the side pipes on, and then I measured from the bottommost portion of the side pipe tube to the runway, and on this side I had 5 inches. On the other side of the car I had 6 inches. And so basically what that meant was the engine was sitting low on the passenger side. We want them even. We want the side pipes and the cutouts in the body to be at about the same spot. Not perfect, because they're never going to be perfect, but we want them as close to perfect as we can get them. Now, the other thing I did is when I bolted the side pipes up, I wanted to make sure they were both the same level. So I used a torpedo level, and I stuck that on top of them. And then I looked for the bubble right in the middle, or as close to the middle as I could get them. And I wanted to make sure both sides matched, or they were really close. And what that does is it gives me a good, solid place to measure them up here at the tube. Once that's done, you can see I've got the nuts tightened now. But I've had those loose, even for first start. The engine doesn't rock a whole lot inside its cradle when you start it. But if you put a load on it, you put it in gear and then transfer all that torque to the rear wheels, you're going to have some issues. So make sure you have it nice and tight and bolted in before you take it out and run it around or anything like that. But up to this point of the build, you really don't need to worry about those bolts being tight, because you're going to use the side pipes to help you get the engine level. So like I said, it was low on this side of the car. So basically what I did with those nuts still loose is I grabbed this with both hands right here. Now, if you're not working on a lift, I completely understand. You'll just be lower. But I grabbed this right here and I gave it a good tug up. And I wanted to see how much I moved it with just that initial tug on the side pipes. Now, don't get your panties in a bunch. You've got the headers bolted in with a minimum of 8 bolts on each side, and you've got 4 bolts here in the side pipes. You're not putting that amount of stress on the side pipes as you're doing it. Now, I will tell you, if you are using the newest Factory 5 headers with the ball flange, you may find that it moves instead of the side pipe, or it kind of moves the side pipe on the ball, in which case you're going to have to readjust, tighten those down a little bit, and rather than grabbing the side pipes like I do, in this case, these don't have the ball flange, you're going to have to grab it here. You're still going to have quite a bit of leverage, and you will be able to move it up depending on which side is low. So my first initial tug yielded me about 1/4 of an inch, and I needed a 1/2 inch. So I came back to the passenger side of the car and I gave it about the same amount of pressure up in a good tug. I got it almost spot on. I think I was probably 5 and 7/16 on one side, and it was 5 and 9/16 on the other. And I said, that's good enough. A 16th off in that amount of space is just fine with me. So then I went ahead and I tightened down the nuts on each side, and now they are where they are going to stay. The only thing I did notice is that this side pipe is kicked out a little bit farther away from the body than I'd really like to see it. If it becomes an issue, I think I've got some wedge spacers upstairs. We'll put a wedge spacer in, probably a degree and a half. It'll be flat on this side, and it'll be just a little bit like a 16th or an 1/8 on this side, and it'll suck that pipe in on the back, and then we'll be fine. So the side pipes are done. What I was working on before that was I was working on centering the steering rack, and you can see I've got this is a Mark III steering wheel and a Mark III hub. I bring that up because when we lost an entire box of parts, one of the things that was in that box was the steering wheel and the hub that had initially been sent to Russ Thompson, and that was a Mark IV hub. The only hub that I had brand new here in the shop was a Mark III hub, and there is a difference between them. Basically, the Mark III hub clocks 90 degrees of what a Mark IV hub clocks on the actual steering shaft. Now I think, if I remember right, and one of you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, let me turn around so we get some light. It wasn't the first run of Mark IVs that they changed it. It was actually when they changed the steering shaft to this new multiple piece with universal joints that bolt together or bolt on the steering shaft versus the welded one like we have, because this one really resembles the one I have in my Mark III. So if you look here, this is welded, and on this side it's welded. So most of the newer Mark IVs have these mount with a set screw here and a set screw here. So this is the older style. So I don't know whether this was the Mark III style hub or the Mark IV. At this point it doesn't matter. We sent Russ a Mark III hub and he machined it correctly for his turn signal switch to use on this car. So what we had to do once we got the hub temporarily mounted on the steering shaft is I want to center the rack. And what you have to do is you have to first you have to determine what rack you have, whether it's a 2 1/4 lock to lock, whether it's a 2 1/2 lock to lock, or whether it's a 3-to-1 rack. Now normally the 3-to-1 racks are all manual racks. So if you've got a manual rack, chances are you could have either a 2 1/2 or a 3. But if you've got a power rack, it's most likely a 2 1/4 or a 2 1/2. I measured ours, and from lock to lock, ours is 2 1/2 turns. So what I did is I mounted the steering wheel. I made a tape mark. Don't get confused, there are 2 tape marks on there. The tape mark up here is the center of the wheel. The tape mark over here is actually what the center of our steering was when all was said and done. So I marked that center of our 2 1/2 turn lock to lock distance with a piece of tape. And then what I did is I adjusted the steering shaft on the spline at the steering rack. So right up in here where the spline adapter is, that has to be taken off the end of the splines, and it has to be rotated until it meshes up with your wheels being relatively straight in your lock from left to right turning, and then your steering wheel straight. I hope I'm explaining that right. So once I did that, you'll notice that the steering wheel is straight, but my wheels, if you look down the side of the car, this one is cocked in, and this one's cocked out. Now, if you come down here and you look at the distance of the threads here, we've got far more threads on this side than we have on this side. We've got about 1.25 inches of threads on this side. We've got about 2.25 inches on the other side here. So when the owner initially put this together, he didn't center the rack, and that's okay. That's why we're doing it now. But I want to make sure that I center this rack before we have him go-kart. I want to make sure that the steering wheel is straight. I'm going to tell him when he takes it down the block, hey, look at the steering wheel as you're driving this straight down the street, and make sure the steering wheel orientation is proper and it's in the right location, because any adjustments I make now, any fine tuning, are all going to be out front at the tie rod ends. And so I want to make sure that he knows to pay attention to it when he drives it, and then we'll adjust it before the body comes back from Jeff Miller at paint. So that's what I'm working on today. Once I get that kind of squared away, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a real rough alignment. I'm just going to get the wheels to where they've got about 1/2 degree of camber, and then I'm not even going to worry about caster, and then I'm going to set a rough toe on them just so the wheels are straight, and then that's it. It'll be ready to go to Jeff Miller, and it'll be ready for its first go-kart ride. All right, well, it's bright and early. We're on our way down to Temecula. I'm starting to think that maybe this customer I'm working for is bad luck. Things don't always go as planned. And as we were driving down to Jeff Miller's today, we hit a piece of debris in the lane we were in on the highway, and it severed. It hit so hard it severed our rear brake line. Now you can see the brake line isn't hard, it bends. There's nothing wrong with it, other than the fact that whatever we hit just pulled this loose, just tore it out. So I sent Jeff along with the car owner. Jeff came and picked up the trailer. They went over to Jeff's shop to get going on the body. I'm waiting for Mrs. Mk4 to come by. I've got the part on order over at the local Napa. I'm going to come back here, put the part on, do a quick bleed on the brakes, and hopefully be back on the road and get over to Jeff's shop before lunch. So, as a continuing theme, things don't always go as planned. Well, we're on the road again. We got the brakes all squared away. We're on our way to Jeff's. Brakes seem to be working okay. I'm not sure how much of the work at Jeff's I'm going to be able to show all of you today. They came and picked up the trailer and the car, took it right to Jeff's shop, so I'm assuming they've got a pretty good handle on everything down there. So I'll bring you back just as soon as we're pulling into to Jeff's place, and we'll catch up and see how much stuff they've got done. Well, that's one way to get out of all the hard work. Just no brakes on the truck.
Yeah. On that car, yeah. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you, Jeff.
So Anthony came to my rescue along with Mrs. Mk4. Jeff came and picked up the trailer and then came back to his shop and started working on the car. It's awesome.
You already nuts for the windshield, right?
right, I think that's going to wrap this one up. This was anything less than perfect. We had a little bit of controversy just trying to get this thing to paint, but we got it done with the help of Jeff Miller and Jose. And thank you, Jose, for letting us use your truck to get the trailer the rest of the way so you guys could start working on the car. That really helped out. So I think we're going to end it here. As always, if you're enjoying the content, please do the like, the share, the subscribe, all that kind of stuff. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.